The Great Transformation is a 1944 work of social economic history by the Austro-Hungarian writer Karl Polanyi. Polanyi was born in 1886. He served as a cavalry officer in the First World War and afterwards became politically active as a social democrat. He left Hungary in 1920 when a right-wing party took power in Vienna. In 1933, he fled from Hitler to England, but was unable to gain an academic post. In 1940, he went to America and taught for a while at Columbia University. He died in Ontario in 1964. The Great Transformation is a study of the causes of the Industrial Revolution and the world order up to and including the rise of Hitler and Mussolini. At its heart, it's a rigorously argued refutation of the idea that unrestricted free market capitalism can ever produce anything other than chaos. At the heart of the titular Great Transformation was the abject failure of such a system. In order to show this, the author goes back to Tudor times and the land enclosures that were the basis of the agricultural revolution. What we now know as the Industrial Revolution began in the early 19th century with the rise of factory towns. Just before that, a series of protective measures had been put in place by local magistrates to mitigate rural poverty, including the famous Speenhamland system, which Polanyi discusses in detail. These protective measures were deliberately removed as Britain became the predominant world power. The reformers' aim was to create a free market for land, labour and money. Land was isolated to form real estate, which Polanyi describes as the weirdest of all the undertakings of our ancestors. The representations of the Chartists for suffrage were dismissed, and efforts were made to keep the unemployed hungry, since that was thought to spur productivity. The tacit threat of starvation was the final piece in the free market jigsaw, but it had its consequences. As soon as that drastic step was taken, Polanyi says, the mechanism of the self-regulating market sprang into gear. Its impact on society was so violent that almost instantly, and without any parallel development, powerful protective reactions set in. In the latter half of the 19th century, the system broke down across Europe, as it came to be seen as absurdly self-destructive. In a series of state interventionist measures implemented across the continent, protectionist measures were put into place by government after government. Polanyi remarks that it's common for free marketeers to describe this sudden volte-face as a conspiracy. He provides convincing evidence that it wasn't. Paradoxically enough, he says, not human beings and natural resources only, but also the organisation of capitalistic production itself had to be sheltered from the devastating effects of a self-regulating market. In the end, he says, part of the problem was that the free marketeers and much of socialism shared a common delusion, that economic forces were, and had always been, the principal determinant of social relations. He shows that there was nothing natural or spontaneous about the emergence of free markets anywhere. They were all a product of government policies. Polanyi himself was a socialist. Socialism, he says in chapter 19, is essentially the tendency inherent in an industrial civilization to transcend the self-regulating market by consciously subordinating it to a democratic society. The market has to be embedded in society and made subject to the non-economic demands of justice, compassion and freedom. Of course, all of this is extremely relevant in the 21st century, which is why the Great Transformation has enjoyed a revival in the past decade or two. What Polanyi calls laissez-faire or free market capitalism, or sometimes just liberalism, we would probably describe as neoliberalism. Its biggest proponent was Friedrich Hayek, whose 1944 The Road to Serfdom defends a position almost the exact opposite of Polanyi's. But Polanyi doesn't just deploy historical arguments against the free market. He also uses reductio ad absurdum. Labour is supposed to find its price on the market, he writes in chapter 19. Any other price than that so established being uneconomical. Consistently followed up, this means that the chief obligation of labour is to be almost continually on strike. The Great Transformation ends by looking at freedom. Uncomplaining acceptance of the reality of society, the author says, gives man indomitable courage and strength to remove all removable injustice. As long as he's true to his task of creating more abundant freedom for all, he need not fear that either power or planning will turn against him. Because this book's grasp of economics, history and society is so obviously profound, it's difficult to read it without agreeing with the author's assertion in chapter 18 that we have succeeded in proving beyond any doubt that at the heart of the Great Transformation there was a failure of the market utopia. So yes, I was relatively convinced. You may feel differently.